see here. There we go. So, well, welcome guys. It's fun to be back with Engage again, and I'm glad you showed up. I always find it doesn't matter how many guys we have, that's a good interchange of ideas and thinking about stuff. I've got one thing I want to show you on my screen in a few minutes. I want to kind of lay the groundwork. As I was thinking about ministry this week, I've made a couple of trips. I've been down to St. Louis area, visited one of our churches down there at the end of August, and came back and touched base with a couple other churches in Pekin, Illinois, and just met with another church in Galva who's actually thinking about affiliating with us, and we're kind of working through those procedures. And you just get so many different things going on in churches right now as kind of residuals from COVID and all that kind of stuff. It turned everything upside down and really made ministry tricky, to say the least. And yet it really hasn't gone away. I mean, COVID sort of subsided and we're kind of back to normal, but I don't know about you, but I feel like I've seen a real shift in people and commitments. Their weekends are more free for people to do what they want. Some will watch online. Lots of people still haven't returned. Also made a trip out to Ohio here at the beginning of October, visit with one church that seems to be really thriving. It's got 600-700 people in it, and visit with a couple other pastors from smaller churches and hearing some of the stuff they have to deal with. And the one thing that really came to my mind was this whole idea of why are things not working? And the one question I find myself asking a lot is not why are things not working, but why are we doing what we do? And I think of it in terms of programs and ministry, the difference between programs and ministry. And as I thought through this a little bit, I kept thinking that it's very easy for us to run programs. It's a whole different thing to do ministry. Programs are really sort of pre-constructed structures that help us connect with people, and people have put a lot of wisdom and thought into the kind of programs that we often use. For instance, one of our programs around here is Awana. I know a lot of churches have done that and still do it. We still run our Awana program. But when I first came, first couple of years I came, we had a shift in leadership with the Awana program. And after the first year of the new commander, I sat down with him and I said, like, why are we running Awana? And he immediately felt threatened by the question, because it was like, uh-oh, what's the deal? And it really wasn't meant to be a threat. It was like, tell me in your own words why we're doing this. Well, of course, the normal Awana response is so that kids can memorize scripture and get it in their hearts. But my question was bigger than that, in the sense of saying, well, wait a minute, we already run something on Sunday morning for our kids. And so are we just reduplicating what we've already done? And can we afford to duplicate stuff like this? So the question was why? And the obvious question was, what's really the purpose? Now, the reason I say that is because often we don't think, why are we doing what we're doing? We often inherit programs when we step into ministry. They've been around for years and years and years. And sometimes that's fine. But it seems to me that anything that is living and breathing is going to evolve and change and adapt to the changing environment that we're in. I have a realtor friend who tries to sell homes for people who've owned their homes for like 30 years. And he walks into their home and first thing he does is go, uh-oh, you might have to change a few things around here, because I'm not, all this wood paneling you've got around here and this purple carpet that you've been in here for 30 years, that's not going to help sell what you're doing. And yet some churches are like that. They have this tendency to keep perpetuating stuff that they started years ago. And because, for instance, there's no leadership development at all, and I've run into lots of churches who have never thought of the idea of developing new leaders because we've got enough people to fill the slots, that they're 20 years down the road and they're still making the same decisions with the same people. They're not equipping or empowering anybody to reach the next generation. So really, one of the things I just want to simply do here is the question why. Why are we running the programs that we're running? And the obvious question is, are they really doing what we want them to do? So to get back to my story with our Awana commander, I said, are we just doing the same thing we're doing on Sunday with a different program, that we're just ministering to our kids and building them up? Now, if that's what we want to do, then that's great. But if the purpose of Awana is to reach lost boys and girls, then it becomes a problem if it's just our church kids that are attending. I know one church that actually quit Awana because they were running the program, and there's about 3 or 4 churches that sent all their kids to it. And so they were putting all this manpower into running a program for other churches and kids. And they're going like, okay, when we go back and think, why are we doing this? And that sometimes is the biggest thing. Do we stop long enough and ask the question, why are we actually doing this? Well, my commander said, well, there's probably a quarter of our kids that don't come to this church. And I said, well, that's fine. Do they go to other churches, or are they these unchurched families? And he went out of his way to show me that probably a quarter of these kids are not just not from our church, but they're unchurched. They're families that don't have a church home and plugging into it. And I went, okay, that to me changes the conversation, because if we say this is supposed to reach somebody, we got to have some non-Christian families in here, or we're just spinning our wheels. Problem is, if you ever get rid of Awana, you'd lose half your families, because people worship Awana more than they worship what the objective is. And one of the questions that we just did a whole revisioning process in our own church. And the question is, what's the next step for us? And where does God want us to go? And what are we going to do to get there? And part of one of our whole approaches to this is that one sort of philosophical statement that really registered with us is that we want our success in our spiritual health to be measured by the impact we have outside of these walls as much as inside the walls. Well, that changes a lot of people's thinking, because most Christians think success is coming to church, running programs, and everything is internal. So when we adopted this concept that we want our spiritual health and success to be measured by the impact we have outside the walls, even more than inside the walls, we had to sort of say, are we doing that? And right now we're not doing it. So we have some work to do to try to figure out how to get outside the walls. This came to an interesting head the other day. We met as elders, and we were talking about, we have this French immersion school that occupies our building during the week, the school year. And they have probably most of our rooms in the upstairs room. And we timeshare a couple of them. We have one big room that we use for meetings, but even this next summer, it's going to get split in half, and one's going to be a resource room for them. The other will be our nursery. Doesn't mean we won't be able to pull some meetings off in those rooms, but it's reduced our space. So as we have gone through COVID, and we have our worship service first, and then we have our second hour. One of the elders said, isn't the goal of that second hour to get as many of our people in there as possible? And I looked at him and I said, no, I don't think that's what we've ever stated as being our purpose. And yet it raised a really interesting question. As much as we've talked about this, I found it really intriguing that his thought was, isn't our goal to get as many adults into the second hour as possible? And I said, hi guys. My comment was, no, I think our desire now for our second hour, and we're calling it Catalyst, so we moved away from our old names that we called our second hour, is that we simply really want to make an intentional investment in the people who are intentional and eager about becoming not only a disciple of Christ, but a disciple maker, and people who want to live on mission. So my goal is not to get as many adults in the second hour as possible. The idea is, let's find the people who really want to become disciple makers, and let's start investing in them. But what it's done is I've suddenly run into this conflict between his idea of success in the second hour and what my idea of success in the second hour is. For him, it was, shouldn't we get all of our adults committed to the second hour? And I went, well, one, all of our adults will never be committed to the second hour. It's just, they want to sit out and talk to one another. Some are just going to leave. But I said, I don't think success is just seeing if we can get everybody committed to second hour. We have to find people who really want to become disciple makers and live on mission. And let's spend some time, not just teaching them more information, but let's equip them and challenge them with the mission of the gospel. So even in our elder board, even after talking about this and agreeing on this new vision frame that we want our spiritual impact and success to be measured more by what we do outside the building than inside the building, it was interesting to hear this comment that isn't our goal to get everybody in the second hour. And so it shows you that if we don't understand the why of what we're doing, it gets really muddled with people about why we're doing what we're doing. And I think it's one of the things that bogs us down in our church is, as leaders, we don't know why we're doing what we're doing. Patrick, Chuck, when you guys, before I came in, I was talking about Awana program and how a lot of churches have gotten rid of Awana because it simply became a collection agency for not only our church kids, but every other church in the neighborhood. And it's not reaching lost people, which is kind of part of their stated mission. And yet one of the hardest conversations you can have as a leadership team is, why do we have this program? And is it actually doing what it's said it, that we've said it should do? And then to have the courage to say, if it's not, then we have to decide whether we tweak it or we have to disable it and put something in there that's actually going to get that done. But the problem we face is that if we ever got rid of our Awana program, we'd lose half our families because they worship Awana more than they do the mission of the gospel, because it's about protecting and building into their own kids, not necessarily reaching others. So when you look at the issue of why are we doing what we're doing, I think as leaders, pastors, one of the struggles that I've seen for guys is, especially if you find us introverts, I've struggled with this for years and I'm learning to turn the channel on this, is that, well, I don't want to force my opinion on everybody because I want to collectively hear the wisdom of everyone else, which is great. But then the problem is that I don't want to be a dictator, so I never assert what God's put on my heart. So what I do is I basically default to somebody else on the board who has a stronger voice about what they think we should do, and we end up doing what they're doing. And what happens, I think, is we get trapped in trying to please the board and trying to please our leaders and our people, rather than seeing our responsibility as we have been entrusted as under shepherds to not just take care of this flock, but keep it on mission. And yet we're afraid to get it on mission because we're afraid that people will stop being our friends, which I'm not sure why we're worried about it. There's very few that are our real close friends anyway, because one of the hardest people to develop relationships with are leaders, because everybody figures they got their act together and why should they hang out with me, kind of thing, So
that's how I feel with you, Brad.
What's that?
Can I even hang out with you? You got everything together. I just don't know if I can.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, well, you and I can chat later about that. So
yeah, please.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah.
So let me show you something in terms of the why. I want to share my screen and show you this diagram. This is nothing new, but I want you to think of it. Can everybody see the life cycle analysis? Is that okay? Okay. So the idea here is that we often think about this in terms of a church, or let's say primarily a church, that when a church plants, it has a beginning. There's a lot of enthusiasm and energy that's put into getting it started, either out of necessity or enthusiasm. Because, like, for instance, a church plant, Kevin Rutledge shared a little while ago, they know they've got a timestamp where they're going to dissolve if they don't get there. So there's a lot of effort and energy that's put into the beginning of let's say, a church. And when it starts really connecting with people, there's obviously more people coming, they're giving, all that kind of stuff. But the real danger, obviously, is you get to a point where it's like, well, we don't have to work at this anymore. We're pretty comfortable. And so then the church starts this decline or deceleration on the other side of it. And if it doesn't turn that around, it ends up dying. And we've got a lot of healthy churches, but we got a lot of other churches. In fact, I visited with one church over the last 3 months. They're way down in this dying zone. They used to brag about having 700-800 people, and it's whittled down to about 70. And when I visited with them, they said, the leadership that I talked to, they said, we're under a lot of pressure from our people just to hire another pastor, and they think that's going to solve the problem. And I'm kind of like, wow, I wouldn't recommend a pastor walk into that if his life depended on it. You know, that sounds like a suicide run. So I'm certain you're familiar with this particular framework, but I want you to think of it in terms of programming. I think sometimes we don't take time to look at this in terms of a program. You know, when I got here, it was the typical, you do Sunday school first, then you do the worship service. And I know how that got started. That was way back in the 60s and 70s when the Sunday school was the big evangelism tool. So everybody bought buses and they sent people out in buses and collected kids. And so that first Sunday school hour was all about evangelism and reaching kids and everything else. But like 40 years later, we're still operating on the same paradigm. And when I came here, and in many ways that's fine, but again, the question is, why are we doing this and why are we doing it the way we're doing it? And so when I came here, I said, why are we doing this? Because the Sunday school numbers kept dropping. The older folks would plug into it, but all the other younger families wouldn't bother at all. And so I said, well, why are we doing it? And what do we think this thing should be accomplishing? And we've discovered that it wasn't doing what it was intended to do. So we literally swapped it. We did our worship service first because we felt people had higher value for that, and then did Sunday school second till COVID hit, and then it upset everything. So we obviously are used to thinking about this in terms of a church, but probably the nuts and bolts under it ends up being the particular programs that we have. And I just find it really helpful because often we just accept the fact that we have these programs and they've been around longer than I've been here, so we just do them. But I think there's a lot of wisdom to say, why are we running this program? And people may feel threatened about it, but where is it on this life? Where's this program on the life cycle? You know, you can have a men's ministry or a women's ministry or a children's program that way back when had, 120 kids in it. Now it's got 30. Well, just by sheer numbers, you're going to say, what's changed and why is this the way it is? So I want to suggest to you that if you want to understand the why of individual programs in your church, this is a helpful way to start asking questions, is why are we doing this particular program and where is that program on this life cycle? Now, I'm used to thinking about it as a big church, and we do understand that that means changing, but sometimes it's really hard to figure out what needs to be changed. But the other way that I think this can be used, and I haven't really used it much for this until recently, is to think about this in terms of individual people. When people come to Christ, they'll be a young kid or a teenager, they come to Christ, they get involved, and their life starts to really flourish. And then, then they hit college, and then they get their head smacked in by all this worldly philosophical ideas or some other circumstances. I know people that have lost loved ones, had a bad experience with Christians, and everything starts to decline and go down this side of it. And at some point, their faith, this living, breathing faith they have, is really on the process of dying. All they're doing is conforming to structures and things that they did years ago, but there's they're not flourishing, they're not booming, as it were, here. They've hit this peak personally in their life, and they're starting to be in this declining process of, I go to church or I miss some weeks, nobody's investing in their life, and so there's no way to figure it out. And then by the time we figure out as leaders where they're at, they're all the way down here. And I found it interesting to think of it in layers. Yeah, we think of this in terms of churches, and as leaders, we tend to go, well, okay, we need more people, so we tell our people to invite more people. But it still doesn't answer the why. Why should a person walk into our church and participate? What are we really going to do with them? And I think it's helpful for us every once in a while. We're just starting to set our budget. We've got a big budget meeting tonight, and it's going to be set up for the next year, as it were. And we're really trying to teach our people is, why are we doing what we're doing? And giving them a sense of, if you don't know what the purpose is, if you don't have a clear thought of why you're doing what you're doing, this thing's going to get buried in the mud somewhere down the road. And it's a really tough thing to think about, because you get people who are siloed in their ministries. They want to do what they want to do because they like doing it. And and you got 6 programs that are doing essentially the same thing. It's building into Christians. And so I've repeatedly had one of our, used to be an elder, now he's our primary trustee. He says, and I didn't even notice this. He says, one of the things that you've advocated since you got here that was very different mindset than what we had before. And this strikes me odd, so I'm not even quite sure how to explain it. He says, you have continually emphasized relationship with Christ. And I went, as opposed to what? And he said, well, we just being the church, we're gathered together, we teach and we have classes and do things, but you've put such an emphasis on this whole idea of the power of God's personal presence and being in relationship with him, that just sounds different to us when you came. I'm kind of like, really? Really? But that little thing there actually affects why we're going to do what we're doing. And that's why I say in our second hour now, I don't really care whether everybody comes or not. I only care that I'm going to look for the people that have some of the heart and the vision and maybe lacking the know-how of how I can be a disciple maker and how I can live on mission. And I'm just going to spend all my time building into them. If the rest of the church doesn't want to come, I'm going to have to be okay with that, because one, they're not all going to come anyway. And I want to have a real crystal clear idea is that if you come to this class, we're here to help energize you. So I'm actually leading a marriage class in our second hour, but I'm talking about it in the sense of disciple making. I've told them the reason why I want you to have a healthy marriage is not for your own sake. I'm looking for couples that will build into other couples. That's the mission. And my ultimate goal is I want you as a couple to build into couples in your neighborhood. So if you're not here, if you're not interested in that, this is probably the wrong spot to be in. So what we're trying to do is get a great deal more clarity on why am I doing what I'm doing. And if I can encourage you to think about anything, is if you go stem to stern in terms of your infrastructure and your church programming, why are you doing what you're doing? What is its purpose? And do you have 4 things doing exactly the same thing? Because I'm kind of going like, at some point we can be obsessive compulsive about doing stuff for Christians, and we've literally abandoned the world because it's getting scarier and scarier out there, and we don't want to touch them, or we don't want them to touch us, because we might get unclean or something. I don't know, whatever. So one of the things that helps me in this goes back to Ephesians 4. And so let me briefly share this, and then I'll leave it for interaction a little bit. We're familiar with APES, the apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, and teachers. But then he goes on, and the part that sometimes gets a little cluttered and we don't know what to do with is look at the why. This is why Paul wants pastors and teachers to equip people. And he goes down, when you get down to, where is it? Start at 12. We're to equip the saints for the work of ministry. And then he talks about, to me, 5 things. For the edifying of the body of Christ. Now, the church didn't do so good during COVID to edify itself. It tried to rip itself apart and everybody in its way. And that says something. For me, I put the challenge on, okay, what have we been doing that hasn't edified the body so that it didn't result in this kind of stuff? What are we missing? And I tend to do that. I put the responsibility on me to go, as an under shepherd, as a pastor, as a leader, are we really doing things that are getting to the heart of the issue for people? Because when they disintegrate this quickly, they'll blame everybody but themselves. So I'm not worried about that. But it helps me say, what are we doing and what's the purpose of it? Why are we doing it? And is it really being as effective as it should be? The second one is, do we all come to a unity of the faith? This is kind of the picture of probably one of the healthiest church pictures you have in the scriptures. We have our own that doesn't center on this one particularly, but lots of churches don't have any picture of what they want to produce at all. If you come to our church, here's what we're trying to accomplish and try to get you to. And a lot of churches don't even have any idea what they're trying to produce. But we want to build people so that they come to a unity of the faith. For me, that a lot of that centers on the gospel. that our commitment to the gospel is paramount of nationalism, cultural issues. And I've told people, if we step outside the gospel and don't have a unity of faith around the gospel, and we step outside of that, even if the causes and issues are legitimate, you've got no more of a voice than every other clown out there, because you've stepped out from the one thing that gives us this distinction and keeps us safe in this whole journey of living in the world. And so to me, this idea of having this unity of faith, not around our issues or around us, but around Christ, is critical. And then it says, and of the knowledge of the Son of God. I don't know anybody who has a perfect sense of the knowledge of the Son of God. But I am really pushing people to say, I try to get rid of the word perfection. It becomes sort of this ridiculous little excuse. Well, we know we can't be perfect, so, why bother? What my encouragement is, can you tell me on a weekly basis of your movement in knowing Christ and growing in that relationship? I run into people all the time where once you're talking about a truth and they go, oh, I know that. And my response is, oh, you know this? I say, and so my next question is, well, all right, tell me what this looks like in daily life then. Like what, basically what difference does it make? Because it's kind of the conservative evangelical, normal response. Oh, I know that. And I'm tired I don't care what people know. It's to some degree, it's getting nauseating because, yeah, well, we know that. And my next question is always, okay, well, help us learn by seeing in your life, what does this look like on a regular basis? What difference is it making? And then the conversation goes right off the rails because they have no idea how to answer that question. They just believe an idea and they think that's good enough. And I've noticed that. And then it says, to the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ. We want a body that is filled with the fullness of Christ, not full of every philosophical issue. And, sometimes our churches are full of conflict because we're fighting over CRT, we're fighting over whatever cultural issue, Christian nationalism, everything else. And it's not filled with the fullness of the presence of Christ. So for me, the encouragement is, as pastors, we and our leadership team know what we're aiming at? Do we really know why we're doing what we're doing? And I think there's no way to get it perfect. But I think we have to work on getting way clearer about this than we normally are, because I think that it is easy for this to get really mushy. And then we end up just doing things and like throwing spaghetti on the wall. We hope something sticks, and we're not really investing strategically or intentionally in people's lives. So that, again, it comes back to, why are we doing what we're doing? Why do we have this program? What is its clear purpose, and are they doing it? So for instance, we have community groups in homes. And we've now designated that the primary thing is to teach people to be servants. So they serve one another and serve people in the community, but that's their basic purpose. Because when we have discussions about small groups, community groups, life group, whatever you want to call them, people usually come up with, oh, well, but our community group does this too, and it does this, and it does that over there, and it encourages people, and we pray together. So I'm going, oh, so you guys do everything, and there's nothing else you need to be involved in because your community group does everything. And then they go, well, no, it doesn't do everything. Well, what's its purpose? Why are you doing it? Well, we like do this and we do this and we spend some time praying and we catch up on life and we do a little bit of Bible. I said, but what's the outcome? Why are you doing that? And it's really a sticky question, because we got leaders who don't know why they're doing what they're doing. And it's our responsibility as leadership to get alongside these people and say, helping them know why are they doing what they're doing? Because if they lose sight of that, I think our churches will go on the downside of that life cycle, and it'll just decay and rot and die because we don't really know why we're doing what we're doing. We don't know what difference it's supposed to make. And, that's a challenge in and of itself. So sometimes the reason why things don't work is because we don't know why we're doing it. And I think it's good to think of it on a church level. It's good to think of in terms of infrastructure. What are the programs we're doing? But I think a life cycle analysis is even good for us on an individual basis. Am I flourishing and growing and walking in the presence of Christ and serving people and sharing my lives with lost people? Or am I kind of coasting? You know, am I just kind of status quo, going through the motions, doing my job, you know, moving from one thing to the next? And that's when things can get stale really quickly. All right, so I've babbled on, thrown a lot of things on the plate. I'd love to hear some feedback or comments, perspective, whatever pushback you have, just to kind of think through why things don't work is because we don't know why we're doing it. So anyway, floor is open. Any thoughts, comments? Got a lot of work to do in your church. I don't know.
The concepts you brought up are great, and I totally agree. I think we should be constantly thinking through the intention, the purpose of our programs. I remember, and I missed the beginning of this, I might have missed you talking about this too, but not a new idea, not a new concept. I think it was the Acts 29 network of churches from, I remember talking about this probably 10 years ago, if not a little longer, where they were eliminating like all programs in their churches because they were saying that the programs are getting in the way of the main focus of their church, which is to glorify God and worship him, and then to go out with the gospel. But they were so busy within the church that they never got outside of the church. So I agree, that's kind of what you were hitting on too, and I agree. I think all of our programs are doing really good with having purpose. I do struggle with our children's program as well. And it's because it's that typical thing we all struggle with, which some years it's up in numbers. And right now we're down, down because all the kids have moved into youth group.
There we go.
Chuck's loving it, but we got like average now of about 20 or so kids. We have kind of a copycat of Awana we call Coach by Christ. And I struggle, but I think it's not that it doesn't have a good purpose, but it's like you said, we need to define its purpose because it's not really having a purpose of outreach, but what it is doing is bringing up our kids in our church of knowing God's word. But I came from a church which did Awana, and it was a big Awana program. 150 kids would come in. And they were expected when they came in the door, they already knew their verses from working on them at home, or in the class time, they just sat in a corner and worked on their verses while the adults worked with the kids that did have them memorized. Whereas ours very much turns into a few kids, Chuck's kids come in. Man, his kids are on it. They've got so many Bible verses memorized. But most of the kids, we're just helping them read the Bible verses the whole time and then repeat them to us. And they're really not memorizing them. Or half the kids can't even read. So you're just really helping them soak it in. But I struggle with the purpose. I think they're really not memorizing them, or it's not really new kids, but it still has a great purpose of these kids are getting the word of God into them.
Right.
And they do. It's amazing how kids soak it in. So I think it's still great. And I think the church needs to have children's ministries, but I do struggle with our children's ministry as well, because I would just like it to be more efficient. I'll put it that way. But so much that comes down to the leaders you have. And we're kind of at that point where in the next few years, we'll probably be getting some new blood in there to lead it. Right now we're just kind of on standby.
Right. Well, I appreciate it, Patrick. It's you know, when we started our Awana program, I think this year the commander got people together and said, you know, I don't think we need any more leaders. We got enough people to fill all the technical slots. But you can tell that the numbers are getting bigger as you move up the age bracket, and because the key is, if you're not bringing in new families, at some point it's going to dry up. Mm-hmm. And so that my concern is always trying to say, like, all right, you can't do everything with everything, but if, you know, reaching families and is kind of the lifeblood of it, what part of this program is really trying to go out there and connect with lost families? Because, you know, again, it's easy to get comfortable. Hey, we got a lot of kids. This is going to keep us busy. And, you know, and as you said, when kids move up into the youth group, all of a sudden it's kind of like, oh, nuts, like our numbers have dropped. And
Yeah.
so then the question is, why? Well, we know why, because we've just ministered to our kids. And part of it is we haven't built into the system. How do we connect with families out there and bring them into this environment so that we have a constant flow of individuals coming in? And
Sure.
I think that's a good example of the right issue that we have to keep asking ourselves is, okay, if this is meant to be outreach, what does that look like, and how, and is it really doing that kind of thing? So,
You know, it's interesting too, because I would say I lost my train of thought. So I'll say the second idea I wanted to
Sorry.
present. You talked earlier too about things people come to church for, or what we think will bring people in. And it was at a business meeting not too long ago where there's this church pavilion the church has wanted to build since before I started a few years beforehand, and still trying to raise money for it. And we worked through all the plans and everything, but not long ago at a business meeting, at the end of COVID, a group who has been big pro build the pavilion brought that up as, we need to stop putting off this pavilion. That will bring people to the church, like a Field of Dreams type mentality. And I had to kind of tell them that that is the wrong mentality. I see a pavilion as a good resource for the church, and I'm not against it, but even that, it will sit vacant most of the year, especially in Wisconsin with our winters. But we have an amazing park a mile down the road that people use that. They think, well, people will reserve our pavilion for birthday parties and anniversaries, and then that will get them in the church. And sometimes our purposes just, they really aren't going to come to light.
right. Yeah, well, that's good insight, Patrick. I mean, there's nothing there to disagree with. I think the danger is, you know, people keep wanting to manufacture something that will bring people in without the personal responsibility of building relationships. And I think we're done with those things. I mean, we just can't build it bigger, better with enough CGI stuff to like people walk in and go, wow, that's amazing. Because then you end up with, you know, this fake thing that you're doing that doesn't talk about the power of grace. It's just demonstrating our creativity. And I'm not
That's a
against
great
doing,
point.
I'm not against doing creative things. I've preached messages with visual aids and all kinds of stuff to help communicate a point. But I'm not a dog and pony show person at all. It's like, if the Spirit of God isn't in you and you have no interest in doing this, I can't help you. And so this is why we're trying to prioritize saying, let's find and move alongside the people that have a healthy, intentional desire to want to be disciples and disciple makers and live on mission. And let's build a new catalyst with that smaller group of people and rebuild, you know, the energy of what God can do here through them, rather than trying to move everybody into classrooms on second hour.
Yes, and that's such a great point. We can't continue to keep trying to throw these exciting images at them to just get them in. It's not going to keep them. It's about, like you said, and that leader said to you, but it's about your relationship with Christ, and then that going out to others for people to see and to build upon.
Yeah. And that's why I'm super strong on life disciple making, because with all the clutter in people's lives, I think it's the only way to get enough encouragement to actually kind of go, oh, I'm supposed to do something with this. I mean, even in the marriage class I'm doing, I threatened them. I said, here's the assignment I want to give you, is take one of the fruit of the Spirit and try to do things intentionally to build that into your spouse this week. And they all came back and not one couple had done anything. So I said, all right, gang, so here's a principle. We just keep hardening our heart to truth if we hear it and don't do anything with it. And so I know you got a lot of stuff going on, but let's try it again. If we don't do anything with it next week, I'm going to play the same video and we're going to do it all over again until we figure out we're supposed to do something with it. It's very, very hard for people to take truth and actually sort of on their own in the chaos of their life, make the time to go, oh, okay, I need to intentionally apply my life to this truth. And even when people do, there's some of their spouses where I heard from one of our gals going, well, I know my husband is doing something based on what the challenge was, but the skeptical side of me was going, well, he's only doing it because you told us to do it. I'm kind of like, that's a bad thing?
Mm-hmm.
Like, you mean, so even when we step out and try to do things that we think are obedience and a faith step based on God's word, when people see that, they see it as fake because you're only doing it because you were told to do it. I'm going like, we're in trouble if we're going to get that cynical about what living by faith really means. But that's where a lot of our people are at in our churches is, well, if I do that just because the pastor said it on Sunday, you're going to know it because that's what he talked about. So that makes it inauthentic. Like, where are we going from there? We got nowhere to go from there if that's true. So yeah, I think, Patrick, you hit it on the head. It's not about, can we get people in the building? Can we equip our people to have the kind of relationship with Christ that they'll go out and make that kind of difference and make that impact? And that's why I think we have to keep saying is, are we getting there with what we're doing right now? And that's why we're trying to change some things. You know, we're sitting down going to talk to our men's and women's ministry and saying, look, we're going to develop a different layer of disciple making. We need you guys to be the tip of the spear of touching our community. Can you do that? And trying to get some real intentionality about, let's do things where we can hang out with unbelievers and rub shoulders with them. Because we all believe in that. We're just not doing it.
Brad, I think, you know, your point of just asking why, and when people realize, okay, why am I doing this? Why am I running this program? Why am I, like, all of a sudden, you know, it's like if they're dying, you know, you get them to ask, well, okay, why are we doing it? Well, it gives them a new look at, oh, I'm doing this because I'm pursuing life, or there's something there that's more than I have, or more than these kids are experiencing. And it's like it renews that, and then, but it gives them also then that ability to evaluate, well, is this bringing life? Is this advancing the gospel? Is this, you know, and so instead of the dying of, well, we're doing what we're supposed to be doing, we're doing what we're supposed to be doing, but why? Oh, is, you know, and it's like it gives them a way to evaluate what they're doing, and hopefully then to refresh, you know, the strategy.
Yep.
And whether they use the same program or not, whether it's a, you know, whether you still build the pavilion or not, you know, if it can accomplish something, then all of a sudden what could be a bad idea can become a good idea. But maybe they'll realize, oh, wait a minute, we're not going to accomplish what we want to accomplish by building the pavilion. The goal isn't to build the pavilion. The goal is, well, why? What, you know, what was the purpose again? And how is this going to fulfill it? And all of a sudden, you know, it can take on that new life.
Right.
But yeah, it's asking that why and keeping that fresh and in front. And that's even where the power of evaluating at the end of, you know, of like each year at the end of our Awana season, you know, can we evaluate? Okay, did we accomplish it? Is this working? What do we need to do different? And, you know, and it may bring them to say, let's ditch it, but it may bring them to say, oh, we need to tweak it, or, oh yeah, this could be done. But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if you're doing a youth group, there's my associate Grant Willett, he runs our youth group still, because we're still trying to get our guy from South Africa here. But he says the thing that just drives me nuts is you got families in the church, and we've got probably 30 kids now that come to junior high, senior high. So we've got a pretty good group, but you'll still get families that will say, well, our son isn't sure that they want to come because there's nobody else here his age. And Grant says, we're not a supermarket. If he wants kids here his age, have him go out and invite them. Like, what's the deal here? Like, and people do this with all kinds of programs. It's kind of like, we're consumers and you're selling something and this seems to fit our needs, so we're going to come. But when you get, like, youth groups are notorious for this, it's like, well, so-and-so doesn't want to come. Or we had one family say, our daughter, you know, we think she's more mature than where the kids are. Can she go up into the young adults? And she's like 17. And it's kind of like, Grant goes, well, now, wait a minute. If she's really as mature as she is, why doesn't she help be a leader in that group and build into kids' lives, not exit the group and go hang out with kids that she thinks she's more compatible with? And so we're fighting this whole consumerism thing where people want us to cater to them. And I'm going, you know, I'm kind of done that been there, done that, don't want to do it anymore. I want to move alongside people and find people that say, I want to live on mission. Maybe not, I haven't got it quite figured out yet, but that's my desire. So let's move along together and let's empower ourselves to make that difference. And so I think what we're going to have to do a little bit is not, we may not cancel all our programs, but especially as leaders, we got to start investing in people that have that desire so that we can grow up a whole new core group of people that will be on mission and be disciple makers, whether the programs do whatever they do or not. Because sometimes you can waste a ton of time trying to change the elephant and it just isn't interested in changing.
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
So Kevin Rutledge, I came in late. Sorry, guys. Hi.
No, that's fine. Good to have
But
you.
love the discussion though. And I think that one of the things I've seen in our church here, I've only been here for about 3.5 years now, First Baptist Church of Sycamore in Illinois. But we have a mission focus that's great. And people want to give to missions. They want to have missions that we partner with all around the world. And the theory, when you go into the team meetings that are leading the missions efforts, is great because they'll say, oh, well, why are we doing this? Oh, well, we want to reach the nations, but everybody knows that you answer Jesus when you are in Sunday school to every question. So, it's like they know that there. But one of the things that we found here, well, I found here, is that when you get those folks outside of that meeting room and you hear them talking just over coffee or whatever, and they're talking about the missions events, the strategy is really, well, we really like all these different cultures and we like all these different missionaries we meet, and we want to have events around these missionaries. We want to send people to cool different places. And there's hardly ever any mission talk about like actually reaching people when this team that leads this is meeting outside. They're not really talking about reaching folks. They're talking about basically the trimmings of missions. And so I think that there's so many pitfalls to this why question, because you can ask the why and get a great answer even, but it's in practice not exactly, or in heart not exactly what it's supposed to be. And I think that that's an incredibly difficult thing to disciple and lead, to get the heart and not just the answer. Kind of in line with what you were saying, Brad, for sure.
Yeah. It's I had one pastor ask about faith promise giving. And my short answer was, the only way faith promise works is if you're already meeting or exceeding your regular budget. The moment you stop not meeting your regular budget, but faith promise is still at the top of the list, you're on the downside of life, because it'll just split the church in half. Because and I can say this with you guys, sometimes I go, yeah, especially in conservative Baptist churches or eventually in the history, faith promise has often been like spiritual guilt offerings out of Leviticus. We're not doing anything here, but we're going to support those who do it, because Philippians 4 says we get credit when we support those who go and do our job for us, not even if we're not doing it ourselves. Well, that lights up a few people when I make that comment, because that same problem is, hey, we're doing global missions, and I go, yeah, but you're not doing it yourself. You don't have any non-Christian friends. Like, where's the oxymoronic idea there? So I think you're right. It's sometimes really hard to get down to it, but for me, it's like, at the front end, Kevin, I was saying, I don't care what the right answer is. I want to know what it looks like in your life. And I think that's the way we have to keep working with our teams.
So real fast, I remember what I was going to say earlier. When it comes to Coach by Christ or Awana, and I was talking about being more outreach focused or more purposed, and how are we continuing to grow and keep these ministries focused on what they're supposed to be doing. So I think it used to be that our Coach by Christ was huge, and youth group too, and youth group's going great. Got an amazing guy behind me. But anyways, we used to be known as the church that always had children's ministries in a community, which my understanding is most of the churches did not have a full-time youth pastor or many ministries for children and youth. Where now it seems like the Catholic Church, the Lutheran churches, the Methodist Church, they've all finally caught on, where even if they don't have full-time staff for that, they're at least doing it, so they're retaining some of their people. So the question is, where, like I said, we used to have maybe 75 kids come on a Wednesday night just for Coach by Christ. Now we're about 20 because it's more dependent on the kids in our church. So what are you guys doing in your everyday life to do the outreach to get kids in? Besides the normal outreach of course, part of our program is bring a friend, but they don't always bring friends. So besides maybe a biannually, a couple of times a year doing a event where kids can again invite friends to the skating rink, or we do an ice cream night. Besides that, what are regular outreach things you do to grow your children's ministries? Speaking specifically young kids, not youth group. Or is that where we're stuck at right now?
Well, and I want to respect your time because actually I got another Zoom meeting right after this.
Yep, that's fine too.
Our children's director has been really good about really taking the whole concept of disciple making into children's ministry. And so she's created people that are even connecting with kids midweek, outside of the programming, to have discussions with them about where they're at. And she's adopted a new program, Lifeway, which is actually a program you can take into the public schools, but we're using it in our second hour to build character qualities. So we're not there yet, but I really appreciate our children's leader as one who is super committed to thinking about how do we actually disciple kids, not just run a program for them. And I think that's a really important discussion to have, to say, yeah, I mean, I'll take Awana again, then we'll have to sign off. I got a little frustrated that, yeah, we got kids that memorize 300 verses, so they get 300 cookies. And I'm kind of like, you know what, I'd rather have them memorize 10 verses and then go to the parent saying, do you see any difference in your kid's life because they're memorizing the verses, than seeing how many cookies they can get at the end of the year. I just, again, it's, why are we doing this? And is it really getting to where we want them to? And I'm past the right answer stuff. I'm moving way past that to say, okay, so what difference is this making? And I think we have to ask that in our programs too. How do you know this is making a difference? Well, they memorize all these verses. Well, that's the right answer. But then I think you got to bypass the kids and go, okay, so what difference is this making in your kids' life at home? And have they stopped bullying their kids at school or whatever? So I don't, that's, probably a bit trite in terms of, the nature of what you're asking, but we've got leaders in there that were really committed to trying to make it a disciple making environment, not just a program environment. And I would encourage you that if any of you have things that are working, Chuck's been great to build another layer into our network that's related to youth. But I'd love to see at some point a network of children's ministry leaders who are connecting and trying to share ideas of exactly that issue. And this Lifeway program, I actually stole it from some of the guys in Ohio. They said, this is a program we're taking into the schools to give kids a time out to get religious education. And my children's director loves it. So, but we got that because we were talking, and now I'm trying to get them connected and build a layer into this thing that's on a children's level. So if you want more information, we can get that kind of stuff for you. So.
And of course, it's trunk or treat time. So,
right.
There's all sorts of things that I think, like in our community, we have a big trunk or treat, and it's kind of goofy old school stuff, but it's really been helpful. And we've implemented these things we call candy quizzes. I used to do them when I was church planting, and it's just a way of sharing the gospel through like a Bible quiz, where you miss a lot of questions. You're like, just wait. And the last question's about grace, and you get all the candy back, plus a whole lot more, just to share the gospel, say, hey, this is what God does for us, even though we miss all the questions in our lives. And so, we try to make it very gospel centered and outreach oriented. And we have several hundred kids coming through on those trunk or treats. And it actually creates a community awareness. So we have a lot of folks that come to our Awana program on Wednesday nights as well, just because they know of us through things like that. In our summer, we have a summer party in the park for our kids. So, You know, I think just anything you can do, just throw shots on net. That's all we can do, and then just pray that the Spirit will attend it. You know, that's it.
Well, hey guys, I'm gonna have to bring this to a close, but if there's contact me after if you still have questions and want to network, because we can do that, and I think it's really helpful to do that. So sorry, Patrick, I don't mean to kind of cut this off, but I'm late for my next meeting as Kevin is too. So, but let me pray and then I'll let you go. And I really appreciate you guys being here this morning. So, Father, thanks for the challenge of just continuing to think about why we do what we do, and is it really accomplishing what its stated purpose is. And I just pray that we'd have the courage to ask those questions as a church, as leaders, as relationship to our programs and even our own lives. Are we really thriving, or are we on the decline and just doing things because that's the way we've done them? Thanks for these men and their families and their ministries. May you continue to encourage us to the mission of the gospel. And we just pray for wisdom as we step into that, even in the days ahead. And we thank you in Christ's name. Amen.